Joseph Ramos watches in disbelief as Celeste, the young Caitian researcher, removes her damaged environmental suit and offers him the last drops of water from her own reserve pack. The gesture strikes him speechless here in the scorching Arizona desert, with temperatures soaring past 120 degrees Fahrenheit. This alien child chooses to share her precious water despite her species' critical susceptibility to dehydration. The catastrophic failure of the atmospheric regulator at Earth's first joint species research facility has turned an ordinary summer day into a desperate fight for survival. Alarms blare through the eastern wing as emergency systems fail one by one. Through the reinforced windows, Joseph sees the main evacuation group growing smaller in the distance, unaware they've left two people behind. Debris from the regulator explosion blocks their direct escape route. Joseph checks his canteen half full and calculates their odds. The secondary evacuation point lies 12 miles across open desert terrain. Under normal circumstances, the trek would be challenging. With a young Caitian whose environmental suit has been compromised, it becomes a deadly gamble. "We need to move now," Joseph says, scanning the facility's darkening corridors. The xenobiologist in him knows the Caitian biology isn't built for this environment. Their recent arrival on Earth 3 years ago during first contact hadn't allowed for full environmental adaptation. Without her suit's protection, Celeste faces severe dehydration within hours. The failed communication device sits useless on his belt, cutting them off from rescue teams. Joseph feels the weight of responsibility pressed down on him like the suffocating desert heat. The recent diplomatic tensions over bioengineering patents have created an atmosphere of distrust between humans and Caitians. Yet here they stand, their survival dependent on trusting each other. Celeste's feline features show signs of stress, her specialized biology already struggling with the heat. The facility's remaining systems sputter and die around them. Time slips away like water in sand. Joseph knows every minute they delay reduces their chances of survival. "I won't leave you behind," he promises, pushing aside thoughts of the patent disputes and political tensions. Right now, she's not a member of an advanced alien species known for bioengineering prowess. She's not a representation of diplomatic complications. She's simply a young researcher who needs his help. The desert stretches before them, a harsh expanse of sun-baked earth and unforgiving terrain. With limited water, damaged equipment, and no communication, their only assets are each other. As Joseph leads them toward the first step of their 12-mile journey, he realizes this crisis might bridge more than just physical distance. It could close the gap between their species, one step at a time. Joseph's boots sank into the soft sand as they took their first steps away from the facility. The morning sun climbed higher, pushing the temperature from unbearable to lethal. Sweat trickled down his back as he watched Celeste struggle with each step, her fur already showing signs of heat stress. Drawing on instincts honed through years of Marine Corps combat medical training, Joseph halted their progress. "Wait here." He stripped off his outer uniform shirt and gathered the broken supports from Celeste's damaged environmental suit. Within minutes, he fashioned a crude sunshade, anchoring it to create a protective canopy over the young Caitian. "This should help reduce direct exposure," he explained, adjusting the makeshift shelter. Celeste's vertical pupils dilated in gratitude. They pressed forward, Joseph carefully selecting their path across the desert floor. He guided them through shallow depressions where possible, avoiding the worst of the sun-baked terrain that threatened to burn through Celeste's protective footwear. The temperature display on his wrist unit clicked past 125 degrees F. 3 hours into their trek, Celeste stumbled. Her normally sleek fur had become matted and dull, her breathing raw and labored. Joseph caught her before she fell, noting the terrible dryness of her skin beneath her fur. "Let me check your vitals." His fingers found her pulse rapid and thready. Classic severe dehydration. He reached for his canteen, hearing the precious liquid slosh inside. Barely a quarter remained. The math was simple but brutal. Cations needed significantly more hydration than humans. Without it, Celeste wouldn't survive another hour in this heat. Joseph uncapped the canteen and handed it to her. Drink. But you drink it. That's an order. He kept only a few mouthfuls for himself, watching as she consumed the life-preserving water. A low rumble drew his attention southwest. A massive wall of dust approached, transforming the blue sky into an ominous brown haze. Joseph's eyes locked onto a structure half a mile east, an abandoned mining outpost jutting from the desert floor like a forgotten tombstone. We need to move. Now. They altered course, pushing their bodies to their limits as the storm bore down on them. They reached the outpost just as the first blast of dust-laden wind struck. The door creaked open on corroded hinges, revealing an interior filled with shadows and ancient mining equipment. Joseph secured the door against the howling storm. His flashlight beam revealed cracked walls and sand-covered floors, but it was the water purification system in the corner that seized his attention. Though decades old, its basic components remained intact. He studied the machinery, memories of his engineering cross-training surfacing. I might be able to repair this, he said, examining the purification system, but I'll need parts from your environmental suit. Take them, Celeste said, her voice hoarse. The suit's already compromised. As Joseph began work on the system, Celeste spoke again. There's something you should know. She withdrew a small crystal from a hidden pocket. This contains research data on human cation medical compatibility. It's why the patent dispute started. This could change everything between our species. A dry rattle interrupted her revelation. The sound triggered every survival instinct in Joseph's body. In the corner, a western diamondback had coiled itself into a defensive position, its rattle a warning that demanded absolute stillness. The snake's black eyes reflected Joseph's flashlight beam as dust howled outside the shelter. They stood frozen, caught between the serpent's threat and the storm's fury, while precious minutes ticked away. Joseph felt the last moisture leaving his throat, watching helplessly as Celeste's condition continued to deteriorate. The water purification system sat tantalizingly close, its potential salvation just out of reach beyond the deadly coils of the rattlesnake. The remaining water in Joseph's canteen wouldn't last another hour in this heat. Time and options evaporated like morning dew in the desert sun as they faced their threefold crisis: snake, storm, and the relentless thirst that threatened to claim them both. The rattlesnake's scales gleamed in the flashlight beam as Joseph assessed their options. He inched backward, keeping his movements slow and deliberate while scanning the debris-strewn floor. A rusted length of pipe caught his eye, the right shape and size to serve as an improvised snake hook. Before he could reach for it, Celeste swayed beside him. Her fur had become completely matted, her breathing shallow and rapid. The Cation's legs buckled, and Joseph lunged to catch her before she tumbled into the snake's strike range. "Stay with me," he whispered, supporting her weight. Her skin burned through her fur, her temperature had climbed to dangerous levels. To his surprise, Celeste's trembling hands reached for a small compartment in her damaged environmental suit. She extracted a medical kit and removed a slim crystalline capsule filled with iridescent blue liquid. "Emergency stimulant," she explained, her voice barely audible above the howling storm. "Take it. You need it more than no." She pressed the capsule into his palm. "Human biology can process it safely for me. It would only speed dehydration, please." Joseph studied the capsule, nodding its alien design. The young researcher's logic was sound. Her condition had deteriorated too far for stimulants to help. He broke the seal and swallowed the compound. The effect hit him like an electric current. His senses sharpened, muscles tensed with newfound energy. The world seemed to slow around him as enhanced reflexes kicked in. He grabbed the pipe, testing its weight. The snake remained coiled, head tracking his movements. Joseph approached from an angle, keeping the pipe between himself and the diamondback. With precise movements, he guided the snake away from the water purification system and into an empty storage container. The lid sealed with a satisfying click. A deep groan from above drew his attention. The outpost's walls shuddered as the storm intensified. Sand poured through widening cracks in the ceiling. The structure wouldn't hold much longer. While examining the purification system's components, Joseph's flashlight beam caught a metal grate in the floor. He pried it loose, revealing a maintenance shaft dropping into darkness. The passage was narrow, he'd have to turn sideways to squeeze through, but it appeared to connect to a larger tunnel network below. "There's something down there," he called to Celeste. "Maybe supplies." He lowered himself into the shaft, using edges of exposed support beams as makeshift handholds. The passage opened into a storage room. Emergency supplies lined the shelves, including sealed water containers. His enhanced vision picked out faded mining maps on the walls, showing a maze of tunnels stretching for miles in every direction. A thunderous crack from above spurred him into action. He grabbed 2 water containers and climbed back up. Celeste had slumped against the wall, her eyes unfocused. "The roof's failing," he said, breaking the seal on one container. "Drink this, we need to move underground." She accepted the water but shook her head weakly. "Can't. Navigate tunnels, caissons, spatial disorientation. Underground." Another support beam buckled. Sand cascaded through spreading fissures in the ceiling. The stimulant's effects were beginning to fade, leaving Joseph's muscles trembling with fatigue. The shaft's narrow confines would make it impossible to carry both Celeste and enough supplies, but staying meant certain death as the outpost crumbled around them. Time slipped away with each groaning protest from the failing structure. Joseph laid out the mining maps, trying to identify the safest route through the tunnel system. His flashlight beam traced possible paths while loose sand rained down on the paper. They needed a solution fast. Joseph's eyes darted between the mining maps and the steadily deteriorating ceiling. A plan crystallized in his mind as another support beam groaned overhead. He quickly unbuckled his uniform belt and gathered loose strips from Celeste's damaged environmental suit. "I need you to trust me," he said, fashioning the materials into a makeshift harness. His fingers worked with precision, enhanced by the lingering effects of the caisson's stimulant. He secured the improvised system around Celeste's torso, creating anchor points that would distribute her weight evenly. "What are you?" Celeste's question trailed off as he guided her arms through the loops. "You're riding on my back. It's the only way we'll both fit through that shaft with supplies." He attached the final securing point and helped her into position. Her weight settled against him as he tightened the straps. Joseph gathered their essential supplies: 2 sealed water containers, Celeste's data crystal carefully stored in a protective pocket, and a battery-powered emergency lamp he discovered among the mining equipment. The roof gave another threatening crack as he approached the maintenance shaft. "Hold this," he instructed, passing Celeste the emergency lamp. "Keep it aimed at wherever I'm reaching." He lowered himself into the shaft feet first, testing each handhold before committing his weight. The passage pressed in around them, forcing Joseph to twist sideways to accommodate both their bodies. Celeste's breath came in short gasps near his ear, but she kept the light steady, illuminating each potential grip point. 60 feet of careful descent followed. Loose material crumbled under his fingers twice, sending his heart racing as he quickly shifted to more stable holds. The shaft's walls showed signs of water damage and age, but his methodical progress kept them moving safely downward. The shaft opened into a larger tunnel junction. Joseph helped Celeste down, noting how her fur had begun to smooth in the cooler underground air. 3 passages branched from their position: west, north, and east. The eastern tunnel caught his attention. Immediately, modern support struts lined its walls, contrasting sharply with the crude mining techniques evident in the other directions. "This way," he said, guiding Celeste toward the eastern passage. Her steps had steadied with the improved temperature, but he noticed her eyes darting uncertainly between walls that seemed to press in around them. 20 minutes into their trek, they discovered an inactive mining drone. Its external housing showed only minor damage, and its display still glowed with internal power. Joseph accessed its navigation system, revealing detailed tunnel schematics and most crucially the location of an emergency exit point 2 miles ahead. "There's a comm relay at that exit," he told Celeste. "We can call for help once we reach it." As they pressed forward, Celeste's movements became increasingly erratic. Her head swayed, hands reaching out to touch the walls for orientation. "The space, it's wrong," she whispered. "Can't tell up from down." Joseph remembered her earlier warning about Caitian's spatial disorientation underground. He moved closer, placing steady hands on her shoulders. "Focus on my touch," he said. "Let it anchor you." They maintained this contact as they walked, his gentle pressure helping her track their movement through the disorienting space. Their progress halted at a cavern blocking the main tunnel. The only alternate route crossed a maintenance walkway spanning a deep vertical shaft. Joseph studied the metal grating that formed the walkway. It appeared solid, but the drop below vanished into darkness. He reconfigured their harness into a safety tether, linking them together with the strongest remaining sections. "I'll test it first," he said, stepping onto the walkway. The metal creaked but held firm. "Match my steps exactly. The vibrations from the storm might shake things loose, so we need to move steadily." He began the crossing, feeling Celeste's tether pull slightly as she followed. The surface storm's tremors transmitted through the rock around them, sending small cascades of debris into the shaft below. The walkway swayed gently with each step, a motion that seemed to intensify Celeste's disorientation. "Keep moving," he encouraged, hearing her breathing accelerate behind him. "Focus on my voice. We're halfway there." The emergency exit waited beyond this obstacle, but first they had to complete this delicate dance of trust human and Caitian moving in careful synchronization above the abyss. A violent tremor shook the tunnel, dislodging chunks of ceiling that clattered into the shaft below. The walkway groaned under their feet as a support beam tore free with a screech of protesting metal. The entire structure tilted 15 degrees, sending Celeste stumbling against the railing. "Don't move," Joseph called, feeling her panic through the tether. Her claws scraped against the metal grating as she froze in place, eyes wide and unfocused in the dim light. Joseph planted his feet, analyzing the walkway's mounting points. Each tremor loosened more bolts. The whole structure would fail within minutes. He quickly redistributed their supplies, clipping water containers and equipment across their bodies to counterbalance the severe tilt. "Small steps," he instructed, maintaining tension on the tether. "Match my movements exactly." They advanced slowly, the walkway swaying with each careful step. A sharp pain shot through Joseph's leg. The snake bite wound had reopened, leaving dark droplets on the grating below. He pushed through the pain, focusing on guiding Celeste forward as the emergency lamp began to flicker ominously. "Light's failing," Celeste whispered, her pupils dilating as she struggled to see in the dimming illumination. Joseph retrieved the data crystal's small light source, its weak beam barely piercing the darkness. "Keep your eyes on this light. We have minutes before it dies." Another support strut snapped with a thunderous crack. The far section of walkway dropped sharply, creating a treacherous third-degree incline. Joseph quickly wrapped his belt around a solid railing section, converting their tether into a climbing harness. "We climb from here," he said, testing the makeshift anchor. "The surface storm's getting worse. We need to move fast." They scaled the tilted grating like a ladder, Joseph's muscles trembling with fatigue. Just as Celeste reached for the far ledge, the walkway's main support gave way. Joseph swung his body weight hard, launching her toward safety. The momentum slammed him into the tunnel wall, sending waves of agony through his wounded leg. One of their water containers broke free, its precious contents disappearing into the abyss. Celeste pulled herself onto solid ground, then helped Joseph over the ledge. He collapsed against the wall, breathing heavily as blood seeped through his pant leg. Modern support beams lined this section of tunnel, but a new sound echoed from ahead: running water. "Drink," Celeste insisted, pressing their remaining water container to his lips. "You've lost blood, we share what's left." Joseph took a careful sip before passing it back. "Save it, we're not done yet." They rounded a bend to find their path blocked by flood water, its surface reflecting the glow of a functional emergency light panel. The murky water stretched for 30 feet, reaching chest height at its deepest point. "Temperature's already critical for your species," Joseph said, nodding Celeste's matted fur. "That water will drop it dangerously fast." Celeste's ears flattened. "Your leg won't support you if you try to swim." Joseph studied the tunnel walls, noting the electrical conduits running along the ceiling. "We make a high line," he said, unclipping their remaining tether sections. "Stay dry, stay alive." He began fashioning a rudimentary pulley system, their survival depending on whether the ancient conduit mounts would hold long enough for them to traverse the flooded section. The emergency light panel flickered as another tremor shook the tunnel, sending ripples across the dark water's surface. Joseph ran his hands along the electrical conduit pipe, testing its mounting points. The metal felt solid under his fingers despite decades of exposure to the tunnel's humid air. A light coating of condensation made the surface slick, but the industrial-grade brackets still held firm to the rock ceiling. "The pipe will support our weight," he said, pulling their remaining harness material from his belt. "We cross above the water." He fashioned a rudimentary pulley system, threading their tether through carabiners clipped to his uniform. The setup wasn't elegant, but it would distribute their weight across multiple anchor points. Small waves lapped at the tunnel walls as the water level crept steadily higher. Celeste's fur stood on end, her eyes fixed on the dark water below. Temperature reading: 11 degrees Celsius, fatal for cations within minutes of immersion. Joseph tested the first bracket, applying his full weight. The mount creaked but held. He helped Celeste into position, securing her harness with double-back knots. The data crystal glowed faintly in her pocket, its weak light reflecting off the water's surface. "Keep 3 points of contact at all times," he instructed, demonstrating the technique. "Move one limb at a time, never release more than one grip." They began their traverse, inching sideways along the pipe. Joseph's injured leg protested each movement, sending sharp spikes of pain through his body. Halfway across, a fierce tremor shook the tunnel. Debris rained down, splashing into the rising water. Joseph's leg buckled, forcing him to catch his weight with his arms. "Joseph," Celeste called, her voice tight with concern. "Keep moving," he grunted, pulling himself forward using only his upper body. Sweat dripped from his forehead as damaged muscles screamed in protest. The relay station platform came into view, a concrete pad raised slightly above the water level. Modern equipment boxes lined one wall, their indicator lights dark. Joseph spotted the backup power unit, its housing still sealed against the elements. Celeste reached the platform first, rolling to safety as another tremor rocked the tunnel. Joseph followed, his landing sending fresh waves of agony through his leg. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage, leaving a trail of dark droplets across the concrete. "The transmitter's water damaged," he observed, prying open the main control panel. Salt deposits crusted the circuit boards, evidence of previous flooding. He pulled components from their damaged equipment, power cells from Celeste's suit, signal boosters from his emergency beacon. Celeste slumped against the wall, her breathing labored. "Can't. Regulate temperature, humidity affecting thermoregulation." "Stay with me," Joseph said, stripping wires with shaking hands. "Talk to me about your research." "The data we're carrying, what makes it so important?" Human cation biological compatibility, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Current environmental suits, designed wrong, need adaptation for cation physiology, could prevent situations like this. Joseph connected the final wire and the transmitter hummed to life. The signal strength meter barely registered too weak to penetrate the storm interference. He tracked the cables upward, finding the maintenance shaft that led to the surface antenna array. The access ladder emerged from the rising water, its metal rungs spotted with rust. Several sections had corroded completely away, leaving dangerous gaps in their escape route. The platform shuddered as another piece broke free, reducing their dry space to a few square feet. Joseph checked their remaining water supply, barely enough for one more drink each. He divided it carefully, helping Celeste take small sips. Her fur had begun to mat in clumps, her skin hot to the touch despite the cool air. 40 feet to the surface array, he said, studying the damaged ladder. We'll have to bypass the missing sections. Can you climb? Celeste pushed herself upright, swaying slightly. No choice. Water's rising. Joseph secured their remaining equipment, ensuring the data crystal was safely stowed. The first gap in the ladder waded 10 feet up a 3-foot span of empty wall where the rungs had completely deteriorated. Above that, more gaps created a treacherous path to the surface access hatch. The platform groaned as another section succumbed to the rising water. Joseph stepped onto the first rung, testing his injured leg's ability to support his weight. The metal felt rough beneath his hands as he began to climb, listening carefully for any sound of structural failure from above. Joseph gripped the first rung, his marine training taking over as he assessed the ladder's integrity. He tore strips from his uniform sleeve, quickly weaving them through gaps where rungs had corroded away. The rising water lapped at their legs, its cold touch spurring him to work faster. Here, he said, passing their final water container to Celeste. Take the larger portion. Your body temperature's critical. Celeste's hands trembled as she accepted the container. The data crystal. She fumbled with her damaged environmental suit, locating a sealed compartment near her shoulder. The crystal slid securely inside, protected from the elements. Start climbing, Joseph instructed, testing his first makeshift rung. I'll follow beneath you. The ascent began smoothly, but at 15 feet a violent tremor rocked the shaft. Metal screeched as a section of ladder pulled away from the wall. Joseph wedged himself against the shaft walls, muscles straining. Step onto my shoulder, he said through gritted teeth. Use me as a bridge. Celeste hesitated. Your leg, now. She moved quickly, her weight sending waves of agony through his wounded leg. Fresh blood soaked his makeshift bandage as she climbed past. The infection burned like fire, but he held position until she reached stable rungs above. 25 feet up, debris choked the shaft. Broken pipes and collapsed support beams created a maze-like obstacle. Celeste's breathing grew erratic as the confined space triggered her spatial disorientation. Left hand to the pipe above you, Joseph called, guiding her movements. Right foot on the beam, yes, that one. Small spaces between the debris, just wide enough to slip through. Their last water was consumed during this delicate navigation. Joseph's throat burned with thirst as they emerged above the debris field. 5 feet from the surface, fever clouded his vision. His arms shook with each movement, the infection sapping his strength. Joseph. Celeste's voice cut through his haze. She removed an ornate pendant from her neck, its crystal core glowing faintly. My clan's emergency nutrient source. Centuries old, passed through generations. I can't, you will. She dropped it down to him. We both live or neither does. The crystal dissolved on his tongue, flooding his system with energy. His mind cleared as strength returned to his limbs. They reached the surface exit together, finding it blocked by storm-blown debris. Joseph braced himself against the shaft rim, pushing against the obstruction. Wind howled through gaps in the debris. With a final heave, he broke through. The storm's full fury hit them, nearly yanking Celeste from the shaft. Joseph thrust his injured leg out as an anchor, grabbing her arm. The movement sent white-hot pain through his body, but he pulled her to safety. Dust filled the air, cutting visibility to arm's length. The communications array loomed 20 yards away, its support cables vibrating in the wind. Joseph's leg collapsed as he tried to stand. "Arrays north-northwest," Celeste shouted over the wind, helping him orient himself. Her fur whipped wildly in the storm, eyes narrowed against the stinging dust. Joseph began crawling, using his elbows to pull himself forward. The ground vibrated beneath them as the storm intensified. A vortex began forming overhead, its rotating winds threatening to tear them apart. The array's main support cable snapped with a crack like gunfire. Metal groaned as the structure began to twist. Joseph pulled himself faster, Celeste stumbling beside him as she fought the disorienting wind patterns. The control panel waited just ahead, its emergency beacon dark but intact. The vortex descended closer, and the array's remaining cables stretched to their breaking point. Celeste's fur stood on end, her body temperature dropping dangerously in the fierce wind. Joseph reached for the control panel as a second cable snapped overhead, the sound lost in the storm's deafening roar. Roar. Joseph's hands found the control panel as the third support cable vibrated dangerously above. He pressed his body against Celeste, shielding her from the stinging particles that filled the air. His fingers, slick with blood and grit, fumbled across the emergency keys. 9 degrees north, Celeste shouted, her acute directional sense piercing through the chaos. She gripped his shoulder, steadying him as he worked. The wind tore at them, threatening to separate their tenuous hold on each other. The biometric scanner beeped in rejection as Joseph pressed his palm against it. The screen flashed red, unable to read his signature through the layers of dust and blood. Celeste's eyes narrowed at the familiar panel design. "Hold still," she said, prying open the scanner's access panel. Her claws made quick work of the protective covering, exposing delicate circuitry beneath. She adjusted tiny configuration switches, bypassing the standard sensitivity protocols. "Try now." Joseph's palm connected with the scanner again. This time, a green light pulsed weakly through the dust. His fingers danced across the emergency keys, inputting codes burned into his memory through years of training. Metal screamed overhead as the third cable gave way. The array tilted, its massive frame groaning as it began to collapse. Joseph's infected leg finally betrayed him, muscles seizing completely as he tried to move. He fell hard, directly in the path of the falling structure. Celeste moved with primal speed. Her hands locked under his arms, claws catching in the fabric of his uniform. She heaved backward, surprising strength flowing through her compact frame. They rolled together behind a rocky outcropping as the array crashed down mere feet away. The beacon's pulse cut through the storm's fury, a steady, high-pitched tone that meant salvation. Within minutes, the distinctive whine of rescue shuttles pierced the darkness above. Advanced guidance systems allowed them to navigate the lethal conditions, their engines downdraft creating a temporary haven from the dust. The first shuttle touched down 50 feet away. Its hatch opened to reveal a rescue team in reinforced environmental suits, both human and Caitian medical specialists moving with practiced efficiency. They reached Joseph and Celeste quickly, medical scanners already gathering vital data. "Severe infection, right leg," one medic called out, administering emergency antibiotics. "Need immediate evac." Another focused on Celeste, connecting her to an emergency hydration system. "Critical dehydration, beginning Caitian-specific fluid therapy." As the team lifted them onto stretchers, Celeste reached for her shoulder compartment with trembling hands. She extracted the data crystal, its surface still pristine despite their ordeal. "Joseph," she said, pressing it into his palm. "The research, it's more than environmental suits, it's about us. Humans and Caitians, our biologies. They complement each other." What makes us different could make us stronger together. The shuttle's hatch sealed behind them, cutting off the storm's endless roar. Joseph felt consciousness slipping away as the medics worked, but his fingers remained curled protectively around the crystal. His last sight before darkness took him was Celeste's face, her eyes fixed on him with an expression that transcended species. Antiseptic smells filled his nose 3 weeks later as awareness returned. The medical wing's soft lighting illuminated familiar walls, the research facility, rebuilt and secure. His leg, encased in a sophisticated healing array that merged human and Caitian medical technology, throbbed dully but felt whole. Movement caught his eye. Celeste curled in a chair beside his bed, her chest rising and falling in peaceful sleep. Around his neck hung her clan pendant, restored to its former glory on a new chain. On the bedside table lay an official document bearing both their names, its final page marked by Celeste's distinctive handwriting. Joseph reached for the note with still weak fingers, his eyes tracing the careful script. Water is life to my people, but trust is worth more than water. You carried me through your desert. Let me help carry humanity to the stars. Beside the note sat 2 containers, one holding clear water, the other filled with softly glowing Caitian nutrient crystals. He touched them gently, understanding the deeper meaning behind these simple offerings. His gaze returned to Celeste's sleeping form as the morning sun began to illuminate the room, casting long shadows across the floor of their shared future.